Welcome to Come Rain or Shine with Dan Cockerell. This is the show where we explore the power of leadership and culture on your organization's success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and I'm here with the retired Vice President of Disney's Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World, Dan Cockerell. Hi, Dan.
Hey, everyone. Hey, Jody, how are you today?
I'm great. Now, I will tell you, Dan, I wasn't quite prepared for this. This is the first time that Dan and I are recording video as we record this because Dan now wants to put the show on YouTube. So if you're listening where you normally do, that's fine. Nothing's different, but this is also going to be a YouTube show and I didn't do my hair proper or anything. So it's...
Hey, Jody, we're the real deal. We're not looking, we're about content.
Content. There you go. But maybe it means it's time to actually cut my hair because I still have the crazy hair that I grew from 2020.
Hey, if you're not willing to televise your hair, then you got to get a haircut.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. So, Dan, there's a couple of big movies that came out right around at same weekend and drastically different. There was Barbie. Have you seen Barbie?
Not yet, but it made $1 billion, so I think I'm out of the loop at this point, but it's on the list.
And the other one was Oppenheimer. Have you seen Oppenheimer?
It's on my list also.
All right. I heard Barbie is not what you would expect and very entertaining. I've heard Oppenheimer is a work of art and is going to be looked at as one of the best movies in decades. Even in the future, they're going to look back and say, that was an incredible movie. I have read the book I forget the title. There's a really good book about Oppenheimer. I have read that. Yeah. So what other movies have you seen lately, Dan, that kind of left an imprint on you?
Yeah. So the one I want to talk about today was Air. And it did come out last year. I mean, it's been out for a while now, but Valor and I finally got around to watching it. It was great. It was a great movie. I knew some of the storyline from that. Phil Knight, the CEO of Nike back in the 80s. Nike was known for running shoes. That was their business. They weren't even in basketball, and they were looking to grow the basketball business. And Matt Damon plays Sonny. I don't forget his last name, but he's the guy that comes on that's in business development, and he decides we're going after Michael Jordan. And there's a great clip where he kind of realizes his greatness. And at the time, you have Adidas, you have Converse that were they were the ones. Every big player was endorsed by them, was doing it with them. And Nike was like, they were on the verge of, are we going to stay in business or not? And the punchline is his Michael Jordan's mother, in addition to them paying what Converse and Adidas was going to pay, she negotiated a piece of every shoe because they were going to make Air Jordans, which was a new concept, and a shoe named after a player. And at the end of the film, you have Ben Affleck, who plays Phil Knight, saying, gosh, we're going to have to give a piece of every sneaker we give. And it had never been done before. He said, I mean, how many sneakers can we sell? $10 million? Well, that first year they sold $167 million in Air Jordans back in the 80s. And even today, I think Michael Jordan gets about a $400 million check annually on his piece of those sales. So it was groundbreaking. But I've told you a little bit about, hopefully it wasn't a spoiler alert, although that's all fact out there. But the thing that really got my attention was Phil Knight's Nike Manifesto. He had written down some points of how he wanted the company to run, how he thought about business. And he had a big poster in his office with his manifesto on it. And the thing for me that really caught my attention was during the movie, when Matt Damon would go ahead, who's reporting to Phil Knight in the movie, when he made decisions that were crazy decisions, they would show the manifesto and show which rule it was matching to. So the interesting thing was Phil Knight, he was like totally stressed out by the decisions that were being made, but they directly reflected back to his manifesto. Because in the early days, like every new company, you take risks and you're a cowboy and you're not worried about a board and you're not worried about these things. You're just trying to get a company up and running. And it's easy after a while to take the foot off the gas and say, okay, we're bigger now. We have more bureaucracy. We can't take the same risks we used to. When in fact, a deal like this with Michael Jordan, this whole new model of paying players for a percentage of the sales, catapulted Nike into what it is today. So we're going to put the manifesto in the show notes so you can review them. And I'm not going to go over all of them today, but I want to hit a few of them because I think these are powerful. When I read the manifesto points, it's not because you should adopt these for your company or your department or whoever your team is. The point is they are real. There are not sort of these HR terms that were wordsmithed that sound like really corporate-like. They are just, I can see Phil Knight in a coffee shop writing these down and saying, this is how I'm going to run my company. And that's what they were. And they mean something. And if you had an opportunity to hear the podcast I had within the past couple of weeks with Patrick Tian, Patrick mentioned that. He said, you should have points that are memorable for your team. So when they're making decisions, they can refer back to it. He mentioned something they do in their company called Stay Smart. So they have Stay Smart meetings, which means they get together monthly and they get everyone in a room from his team and they talk about what did we all learn this month? What were the things we learned? How do we get smarter? And they dedicate times towards that. And so when you hear that, Stay Smart, everyone says, yep, I know what that means. It means in our culture, we're about learning. And that's how culture is built. It doesn't have this, these flowery words around it. So the manifesto that Phil talked about, the first one was that I liked a lot is we're on offense all the time. And basically he was saying our company is aggressive. And so that doesn't mean that everyone should work there. If you are maybe an introvert, maybe you're not quite as aggressive, Nike would probably be not a very good place for you to work because that's the kind of company that he wanted to run. That's what his success was built on. And so if you're out there taking risks and you are out there pushing hard for goals and someone told you, well, look, you're pushing too hard, you could go back and say, look, Phil said, we're on offense all the time because that's where we want to be. And it kind of gives you permission on how to act and how to behave. Now, it can't be a justification for anything, but once again, it defines what the culture is going to be like. Another great one, and this is something that I think is fantastic, and maybe you should really think about incorporating into your organization. Perfect results count, not a perfect process. Break the rules, fight the law. So Phil was saying, no matter what we do here to conform and the process we put in place, always be willing to fight through and question it, because that's how we're going to be successful. And in the movie, Sonny goes directly and talks with Michael Jordan's parents, which is taboo. You never go directly to the client. You always go through the agent. And he said, I'm going directly because we're going to get this contract. I got to meet the parents. And he decided to do that. He broke the law. He broke the rules. He fought the law. He was looking at the result and not the process and was able to get there. And I think today, so many organizations are so focused on, did you follow the process? Did you send the report versus what results are you getting? And you become activity driven versus results driven. And we make some really bad decisions because people are rewarded for the wrong things. That's where you look around, you go, how did we get here? How do we think this is important anymore? It's not helping anybody except the person that wanted that report. I think challenging how things should be done and putting it on a poster and telling your team, because when you tell your team this, you're giving them permission to go break rules. You're giving them permission to push back on you. And I know this is a little scary, but at the end of the day, that's the differentiator. That's going to be the big ideas that you're going to get. As long as they do it they're thoughtful about it. They understand what the goals of the company are. It's a way to go that's going to put you out in a different place. I just think a lot of people are really risk averse and aren't willing to do this, but it's a really interesting point. Fight the law and break the rules. So I'll pause for a moment. I got a couple more, Jody, but I'll just weigh in because I know you're taking some notes.
Yeah, that's the hard thing to do is when Dan's talking, I'm always over here taking notes because that is a good thing. In particular, the activity driven versus results driven. So many of us individually and then as organizations, that's kind of what we expect is be at your desk 8 to 5 and be busy the whole time. I think quite often supervisors don't even focus on results as much as they do activity. I really do feel like that's a problem out in corporate America, that I'm more concerned that you're busy and not wasting time than I am that you're getting results. Because if you're not busy, it feels like you're stealing from me, where I say it's the opposite. If you're not getting results, you're stealing from us.
Right. Yeah. And I want to be clear about this. I'm not saying process isn't good. It's good to have process. People love consistency. Customers and guests and clients love consistent, repeatable, predictable outcomes. And a lot of that is done by following rules. But you know what rules are out there that don't make any sense. I remember specifically when I was at Magic Kingdom, one of the managers one day came and to meet with me because I had an open door policy. And he said, look, I've talked to everybody. And you always said, if we had an idea, come talk to you. So I want to run this by you. I said, well, go ahead. What do you got? He said, well, we fill out this inventory sheet every day and we fill it out. We collect them. And then we put them we scan them, we send them to accounting, and then we put them in a folder, and we have to hold on to them, I think, for like 5 years, to retain the document. And he says, I don't think anything ever happens with this because no one has ever called us about these. And I don't know. And we always are like on the hook. Did you get all your inventory sheets turned in today? And it just seems like a process that is not adding any value. So I said, that's really interesting. We'll figure it out. So I made some calls and got with the team that does all the controls at Disney, loss prevention. They're the team that was collecting these. And I said, hey, this is Dan. I just wanted to find out, we do all the parks do these sheets. We scan them, we send them to you. And I said, do you know why you do that? And they said, well, yeah, because we need to know what the inventories are. If you have variances in how much ice cream a cart received and how much it sold, and there's ice cream missing, we need to understand why that happened. Did we give one away because it was damaged? Was it a magical moment? Was there an error? Is there theft? And I said, okay, great. I said, how do you use those sheets? Because they're kind of messy. They're in pencil and pen. And he says, oh, well, we don't use the sheets. We have a system where we look at sales per cart. And when we see something outside the variance, we know about how much every cart makes every day. So on a certain day, if we see it way below, the computer flags it. And then we use that to investigate. We call you all. And I said, so what do you do with these sheets? He said, well, we file them. And I said, you file them? He goes, yeah, we file them. We hold them for 5 years. And I said, did anyone ever look at them? He said, well, no. I said, what if we stop sending these to you? He said, we'd be fine. And the next thing I wanted to say is, well, why the heck haven't you told us sooner? But, I didn't say that. And so we went back and we changed it, and those sheets are gone today. And that manager was on top of the world. He goes, I knew it. It didn't matter. But, we just take things for granted. We don't question things. And people are so busy, they're not going to question things either. So I don't assume that your organization has thought through everything they're doing really well. You've put policies and processes in place for your employees and for your customers that make no sense at all. And I don't care what level you are. If it doesn't make sense, go question it and find out. And if you get a great response back, it's a legal requirement, it's part of Sarbanes-Oxley, whatever, then And a lot of times you're going to hear, you know what, we probably shouldn't be doing that. We just made up a rule and it had unintended consequences. So there you go.
That reminds me when I first became a park ranger. Prior, I had been a financial analyst at a commercial bank. I had no idea anything about park operations or why things worked the way they did. And so it was easy for me to see something that didn't quite make sense, not because I was looking in a cynical way. It's just I would see something and say, well, why do you do it this way? And it would allow me to ask. And there was something that was going on, and you had to fill out the paperwork, put it in a binder, or make a photocopy, send it to headquarters, and then put it in a binder. And I asked the park manager, why do we do it that way? And he said, that's a process they want at headquarters. And I said, but what do they do with it? What happens if we don't send it? And he said, that's a good question. Don't send it and see what happens.
Yeah.
And I didn't send it, and we never heard a word. So we just stopped doing it. And no one said anything.
10 trees, which is good for the Park Service.
That's right. We saved trees. We saved delivery. We saved time. So yeah, Dan's right. But also Disney is fabulous at this too. I know, at processes, procedures, guidelines. Those are in place so you can get creative. I think if it wasn't for all the processes and procedures, it's really hard to get creative. It's really hard to break. When there are no rules, you can't break them. If there's no lines in place, you can't cross them. And if you don't have basic service in place and you're getting the important stuff done, you can't explore outside of that. So there definitely is a place for processes, procedures, rules, guidelines.
Yep.
Get them all in place and then see which ones you can break.
Absolutely. So 2 more I want to talk about, which caught my attention. And like I said, we'll give you all 10 in the show notes, but one of them was great. Live off the land. Phil Knight's champions resourcefulness and resilience. It's about making the most of available resources and thriving in the face of challenges. So the idea here is, you're never going to have all the resources you need to do what you want to do in your personal life, in your companies. That's what business is about. You have to learn how to do the best with what you got. And so he put that in writing. And so the idea was go out and be imaginative, be creative, be resourceful, be resilient, and figure out how to get things done. And don't blame that we don't have enough money. Because we're never going to have enough money. We're never going to have enough resources because we got to put them in certain places. So this idea, live off the land, go ahead and take pride in figuring things out without having everything you need. The story I'll give you here is when the magic bands first rolled out at Disney. The magical thing about the magic bands is they have near field communication, which your credit card has. You tap to pay, and that's pretty common. But they also have a battery in them, and they emit a signal that goes, I think, 15 or 20 feet, maybe a little further. That's what makes them magical. Sensors can pick them up and find out where you are, how long you've been waiting for the bus, if it's going to play a certain song that near you. There's all kinds of other functionality that it can use. So we came up with an idea and said, well, what if we put these sensors at the Auto Plaza at the Magic Kingdom? And so when a guest pulls into the lot, it will scan the band, it'll start a timer, and then when they get to the monorail, it'll scan them again. And then when they get into the park, it'll scan them again. So now we can start real time to see how long it's taking guests to get from the Auto Plaza to the main entrance of the park. We don't care who these people are. We just care that there's a band on their wrist, and a certain percentage of guests coming through are going to have bands. And we now have more information to be able to measure and make adjustments real time, which was a kind of a big breakthrough. Of course, we went through the IT route. We put a request together. It was like $30,000 or $40,000 to install this thing. And it was going to take a year because they had other priorities. And so we could have said, well, we tried. But then, one of my general managers, he had a really good relationship with one of the IT directors. He talked to him. The IT director was like, you know what? We got some extra sensors in the warehouse we're not using. Let me find someone. 3 weeks later, this thing was up and running. And so we could have gone through the process and just said, well, that's what it is. We're just going to follow the rules. Or we could live off the land and take advantage and not take no for an answer and find a different path. And I think that's really important, especially for small companies and entrepreneurs. But people ask me all the time, well, Dan, at Disney, you had everything you ever needed, and so you never lacked resources. Well, no, you just had to deliver more. You always lacked resources, and it just had a bigger pool of resources, and you lacked a bigger pool of resources. But I don't care if you're a small company or a big company, you're always going to have that happen. And so taking on responsibility to not blame resources and figure a way, you'll be worth your weight in gold if you can figure that out. Because it's easy to find reasons not to get something done. It's hard to always find a solution, but that's what people who are successful in business, they're rewarded for that approach to problem solving.
Oh, that is a good example too. And I'm glad Dan talked about that, because I know Dan gets that a lot when he's talking to organizations to say, oh, you're Disney. You've got all the time, all the people, all the resources you want. Well, that shows it's not true. And sometimes you do have to get innovative and see what else is out there.
Yep. So the last one, and this is one of my favorites, and I think this is a great one because it shows some vulnerability. It lets your team know that, and what Phil Knight says is, it won't be pretty, right? It won't be pretty. Phil Knight acknowledges the path to success will be fraught with challenges and setbacks, emphasizing resilience and learning from failures. So when you tell your team that, you know what, team? It's not going to be pretty. We are going to be in some really tough situations. We are going to make mistakes. We are going to fall short sometimes. I think a lot of senior executives or even managers think, well, you can't say that because you're giving people permission to fail. Well, you know what? People are going to fail anyway. You're not always going to be successful. And if you can just let everyone know we're all in this together and it won't be pretty, at least you're giving them a little preview to that. And if you can create that kind of culture, and Patrick on the last podcast talked about that, if you can give people to tell you the truth and be transparent and tell you when it's not pretty, you can find a solution quicker. Because when you have a situation like a red box, right? You're failing, you're not making budget, you're not managing your labor hour, whatever the metric is you're failing in, a lot of times the messenger is punished for that. Whoever has to report that metric is the one who's being asked, what are you doing about that? Well, it's not necessarily on them. It's on the organization to deliver that. And if we can get better at using the pool of everyone we have on our team to take responsibility and accountability for the results and team up together to fix things instead of giving everyone these individual metrics that they have to own. Now, you still need accountability, but when you have a pool of people working on issues, you're going to solve them faster. And so this idea, it won't be pretty. So we know that. And when it's not pretty, talk about it. Put it on the table. Let's deal with it as soon as possible and not wait. And a lot of people say, well, I'm scared to bring it up. I'll just wait till the end of the quarter and surprise everyone that we failed and hope it goes better. And that's not a successful way to run an organization. When you make a mistake, fess up right away, deal with it. If your leader isn't willing to forgive you for that, you don't have the right leader. And if they are, then you have a great organization that's going to, be proactive in figuring these things out.
Well, this has been interesting to take a deeper look at Nike's manifesto. And it's something you can do for you personally or your business to go through the list of 10 and see how does it apply? How would I do that here? And it's interesting. I'll tell you, if I was going to do a travel manifesto, I think the very first thing I would have on there is call Magical Vacation Planner.
Well, I would always call Magical Vacation Planner first. So it's not you're always going to travel with them, but you're always going to call them first before you book.
My family is about to take a 7-night cruise to Alaska. Alaska is the only state I have not been to, and I'm about to fix that. But guess who I called for that? Magical Vacation Planner, and they set us up with this incredible cruise that we're about to take. You can reach Magical Vacation Planner at 407-442-0257 or go to dancockerell.com. There's a banner right there on the website, and they can take care of you. All right, Dan, this has been a great look at the Nike Manifesto. I had read it before. I've seen the movie Air. I've read the manifesto, but it sure does change things when you take a deeper look and actually talk about the individual points of it, rather than just read it all kind of like entertainment and say, oh, that was good.
Yeah. And the cool thing about this is that manifesto is from 43 years ago and still means something.
Still means something. And yeah, someone was good at what they did when 43 years later, it's still relevant.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you for listening to Come Rain or Shine.